The winter morning pressed gray and cold against the tall windows of the old courthouse. Frost traced delicate patterns across the glass, a stark contrast to the heated murmurs inside. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and nervous anticipation, a faint undertone of ink from stacks of legal documents. Sunlight struggled through the clouds, casting long shadows across the benches, highlighting the uneven floorboards that had absorbed decades of whispered confessions, shouted arguments, and heavy silences. Today, that weight seemed heavier than ever. Journalists tapped furiously on keyboards, their cameras hanging from necks, poised to capture the smallest twitch, the faintest reaction that could become the lead photo or headline. A group of parents shuffled their children, trying to keep restless toddlers from tripping over the polished marble steps. The air was thick with tension, the kind that makes one hyper-aware of every cough, every paper shuffle. At the front of the room, the judge's gavel sat like a silent promise, ready to punctuate order into chaos. Yet he hesitated, already sensing this day would defy expectation. On the front row, little Emily squirmed in her mother's lap, her tiny legs swinging nervously, cheeks flushed from excitement or perhaps the chill seeping in from the courthouse doors. Her mother, Rachel, adjusted her scarf, glancing nervously at her daughter and the sea of adult faces around her. Emily's small hand rested lightly on the edge of the bench, almost as if she knew that what happened here was important, though she had no way of understanding the full gravity of it. She only knew the room felt charged, electric, and somehow alive. The case itself had been a source of anxiety and fear in their community for months. A series of break-ins, property thefts, and threats had unsettled neighbors. Adults had grown wary of stepping outside after dark. Children whispered about the man who comes at night. Stories told with the nervous tremor of someone repeating a legend that felt too real. The police had worked tirelessly, yet the man had slipped through every conventional method of capture. And now, today, everything came to a head in this room. Near the judge's bench, the K-9 unit waited silently, a quiet presence that drew as much attention as the attorneys. At the center of the attention was Rex, a commanding German shepherd, eyes sharp, muscles coiled, a silent sentinel trained to detect danger, fear, and truth. He sat motionless, yet every inch of his body suggested alertness, awareness, a readiness that made the spectators tense. Many had seen Rex work before, and every one of them knew that beneath the disciplined exterior was an animal who could sense more than the human eye could see. Today, Rex wasn't just a dog, he was a witness. The court clerk called the case, voice formal and measured. Everyone shuffled, papers rustled, and cameras clicked. Then, as the prosecutor rose to present the evidence, Emily's attention drifted. Her eyes, large and luminous, scanned the room, finally landing on Rex. Something about the dog captivated her, the way he tilted his head slightly, the precise stillness of his posture. She pointed, her tiny finger trembling with a mixture of excitement and certainty. "Doggy, he knows." The words were small but carried across the courtroom like a sudden gust of wind, scattering the calm that had settled over the proceedings. Heads snapped in her direction. The judge paused mid-breath, pen hovering over paper. Reporters leaned forward, pens and cameras ready. The jury's eyes widened in unison, unsure whether they had heard correctly. Adults exchanged puzzled glances. The concept of a toddler's perception influencing a legal proceeding was unsettling, impossible even. Rachel froze, a hand instinctively covering Emily's mouth, then releasing it. The girl's eyes met Rex, again, and the dog's ears twitched in response, a subtle acknowledgement that sent another ripple of unease through the courtroom. It was as though the tiny girl had somehow penetrated the layers of trained instincts, security protocols, and legal formalities, connecting directly with the creature trained to uncover what humans could not. The prosecutor cleared his throat, trying to maintain control, but even he paused, wondering if he had missed something vital. "Excuse me, what exactly do you mean, young lady?" he asked carefully. Emily's response was simple, direct, and unnervingly confident. "Bad man hid, he's under the bench." A collective shiver ran through the room. Under the bench. That space had been overlooked repeatedly, dismissed as too insignificant to hide anything important. Yet here was a child, speaking with an authority that contradicted her years, pointing at a place no adult had dared focus on. The clerk's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted papers, and even the hardened officers in the courtroom exchanged uncertain glances. Rex's tail flicked once, a deliberate, precise motion, and his low, almost imperceptible growl vibrated through his chest. The sound was enough to make the spectators shift uncomfortably in their seats, an instinctual acknowledgement that something was indeed hidden, something worth noticing. The room, once dominated by adult certainty, now hung on a child's words and a dog's instinct. The judge leaned forward, squinting at the tiny girl. "We'll need to verify that claim," he said firmly, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the tension. Detectives rose, cautious yet alert, preparing to check beneath the bench. Cameras focused on Emily and Rex, capturing the moment when innocence and trained instinct collided. For a 3-year-old and a dog, the weight of the room was palpable, almost tangible. And as Emily leaned forward, pointing, her tiny voice breaking the silence again, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Everyone, judges, lawyers, jurors, reporters, waited for the impossible to be confirmed. What could a toddler see that the most experienced investigators had missed? The answer would unfold in seconds, but in this suspended moment, the air was thick with suspense, anticipation, and the extraordinary sense that something remarkable was about to happen. The courtroom, frozen in time, had never felt so small and so large all at once. Outside, the winter wind howled against the courthouse walls. Inside, the tiniest voice in the room was about to change everything. Emily's words echoed in the courtroom like a sudden clap of thunder. "Bad man hid, he's under the bench." The statement hung in the air, fragile yet electrifying. Adults blinked, unsure whether to laugh, dismiss it, or act immediately. But the sharp tilt of Rex's head, the precise flick of his ears, left no room for doubt. The dog had noticed too. And instinct, when paired with innocence, demanded attention. Detective Harris, a tall man with a square jaw and decades of field experience, was the first to react. He approached the bench cautiously, his hand hovering near his holster but not on it. Every step was deliberate, measured, the kind learned only through years of seeing criminals vanish in the blink of an eye. His eyes scanned beneath the bench, shadowed and narrow, searching for signs that a trained dog, and now a toddler, had somehow detected. Emily clung to her mother's arm, whispering softly, "He's scary, don't touch him." Rachel's pulse quickened. Her heart threatened to burst, not with fear for herself, but for her daughter. Emily, 3 years old, was articulating a threat adults had struggled to identify for months. A chill ran through Rachel's spine as she realized that her daughter's perception, and a dog's instincts, might unearth what professional experience had failed to reveal. Rex's low growl vibrated through the courtroom, subtle but deliberate, vibrating in the polished floorboards like a warning embedded in the building itself. The spectators stiffened, the jury leaned forward, and reporters poised cameras with trembling hands. It was a sound that demanded attention, a sound that paired the weight of experience with the certainty of instinct. Detective Harris knelt, slowly extending his flashlight beneath the bench. The beam revealed a jumble of shadows, stacks of court documents, and beneath them the faint outline of scuffed boots. A man's presence, partially hidden, trembled under the scrutiny of the room's collective gaze. The man's hand twitched nervously, brushing against papers as if hoping to remain unnoticed. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him, walls pressing in, as though the building itself demanded truth. Emily's voice rang out again, small but commanding. "He has a toy, he buried it." Gasps rose, some stifled, others sharp. A toy. At first the idea seemed absurd, a trivial detail in a serious criminal case. But Emily's certainty, coupled with Rex's intense focus, made even skeptics hesitate. Detective Harris's flashlight caught the glimmer of something brightly colored beneath the shadows. He reached carefully, pulling out a small bundle, a child's toy wrapped around a stack of papers, hidden under the bench. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled for photographs. Jurors exchanged shocked looks. Adults who had spent months investigating these crimes stared at a toddler and a dog, realizing that the two had achieved what their training, technology, and experience had failed to accomplish. The man under the bench shifted, panic rising in his eyes. He had been careful, meticulous, almost untouchable. But a child's intuition, guided by a K-9's instinct, had undone months of planning in a single moment. The prosecutor stepped forward, voice tight but controlled. "Your Honor, may we proceed with removing this individual?" His words carried authority, but they also trembled with disbelief. How could the legal system, grounded in procedure and precedent, reconcile the idea that a 3-year-old and a dog could uncover hidden evidence? Rex sat rigidly, ears pricked, eyes locked on the man beneath the bench. The German shepherd's tail twitched once, a subtle, deliberate motion that spoke volumes. The suspect was not just found, he was recognized as guilty by instinct. Emily's tiny hand hovered over the edge of the bench, her fingers trembling with excitement and fear, as if she understood the importance of what had just occurred, though she lacked the vocabulary to articulate it fully. The judge's gavel hovered midair, then came down sharply, restoring a semblance of order. "Detectives," the judge said, voice measured, "proceed, but with caution. This situation is extraordinary." The pause was heavy, deliberate. No one questioned the reality. They all understood that something remarkable had occurred, but how to process it within the confines of law remained uncertain. Detective Harris slowly helped the man to his feet. His expression was pale, taut with fear. The courtroom cameras captured every detail. The man's sweat-streaked face, his trembling hands, the way he avoided Emily's gaze. He had underestimated the smallest observer, the quietest witness, and the most vigilant dog in the building. He had thought himself unseen, untouchable, but innocence and instinct had pierced his carefully constructed anonymity. Emily clapped her hands in delight. "See, Doggy said so," she exclaimed, and in her laughter lay an impossible weight. The confirmation that she had participated in something monumental, something adults struggled to explain. Rex barked once in response, a measured, approving sound that seemed to acknowledge their partnership. It was as if both child and dog recognized that they had solved a problem the world had overlooked. The courtroom buzzed with energy. The FBI analyst, previously unnoticed, scribbled rapidly in a notebook, her gaze fixed on Emily and Rex. Every officer, juror, and attorney sensed a shift, not just in this case, but in the very rules of observation, attention, and intuition. The analyst's notes hinted at a revolution in thinking. If a toddler could perceive what trained adults could not, what other insights were waiting in plain sight? Rachel clutched Emily tightly, whispering reassurances, even though Emily needed none. The girl's eyes shone with certainty, with a knowledge that adults envied but could not comprehend. She had pointed, spoken, and guided, and in doing so, she had revealed a hidden truth. And as the suspect was handcuffed and led away, the courtroom's tension shifted into a new kind of suspense. What other secrets had this tiny, perceptive child, paired with a dog of extraordinary instinct, yet to reveal? What new revelations would unfold as a result of a voice so small it had nearly been dismissed, and a dog so trained it saw what humans could not? The room seemed to hum, a low, electric vibration, as if acknowledging the start of something unprecedented. Emily leaned forward, fingers still pointing, eyes bright with wonder. Rex remained at her side, silent but alert, a guardian, a witness, and now a partner in an unspoken alliance. For everyone in that packed courtroom, one truth was unmistakable. This was no ordinary day, no ordinary case. And the next revelation, what Emily and Rex might uncover together, was just moments away. Detective Harris froze mid-step. His flashlight trembled slightly in his gloved hands as the shadow beneath the bench solidified into a human form. A man, partially hidden, partially exposed, shifted under the weight of his own fear. His boots scraped against the polished floor, a small sound amplified in the silent courtroom. Every eye was on him now, every heartbeat echoing like a drum in the tense air. Emily clung to her mother, whispering, "He's scary. Don't touch him." Her tiny voice carried an authority that unnerved even the most seasoned officers. Rachel's heart leapt into her throat. She had feared the dangerous men her daughter's innocence had exposed would see her child as vulnerable, but Emily's bravery and certainty transformed the fear into awe. This was no ordinary child. She was a witness, an unexpected force capable of seeing through shadows adults could not. Rex, alert and unwavering, let out a low, deliberate growl. The German shepherd's hackles were raised just enough to signal both caution and recognition. The man beneath the bench froze entirely, realizing that a trained K9 and a tiny girl had him cornered. He had underestimated instinct, underestimated innocence, underestimated attention itself. Detective Harris crouched lower, his flashlight beam moving slowly across the hidden figure. "Sir, step out slowly, hands visible," he instructed, voice steady but low. Every syllable carried weight. There was no room for error. Officers behind him mirrored his caution, creating a human barrier that subtly encircled the man. But Emily was undeterred. She leaned forward slightly, pointing again. "He has a toy, he buried it." Her words were simple yet precise, like a map directing those who could follow. At first, the notion of a toy seemed trivial, childish even, but Detective Harris's eyes caught the glint of bright color under the bench. "Could be nothing," muttered an officer under his breath, but the twitch of Rex's ears contradicted him. The dog's trained instincts were flawless. He could distinguish the faintest traces of human scent, fear, and guilt. The combination of Emily's intuition and Rex's perception was uncanny, a partnership of innocence and experience converging at the exact right moment. Carefully, Harris reached beneath the bench, his fingers brushing the edges of a small bundle partially wrapped in faded cloth. He pulled it out slowly. The courtroom collectively leaned forward. In his hands lay a child's toy, brightly colored and familiar in its design, tangled with crumpled papers that immediately suggested significance. As Harris untangled the bundle, faces turned pale. Stolen checks, a wallet, and documents revealing months of illicit activity. The man beneath the bench shifted again, panic rising. He knew the jig was up. Every step he had taken to remain undetected had been undone by a child and a dog. His eyes darted to Emily, then to Rex, then to the officers. Sweat gleamed on his forehead, and his hands fumbled at his waistband in nervous, almost involuntary gestures. Emily clapped her small hands together. "See, Doggy told me," she cheered, giggling. Her innocence, her delight, contrasted sharply with the man's fear, magnifying the surreal tension in the room. Rex barked once, sharp and approving, his stance rigid as if acknowledging the victory of their silent, unspoken collaboration. The courtroom buzzed. Jurors leaned forward, reporters snapped photo after photo, and attorneys struggled to maintain composure. The prosecutor moved toward the judge, words tight and deliberate. "Your Honor, this evidence is undeniable. The suspect was located and the stolen property recovered, all due to a child's observation and the dog's instincts." Even the defense attorney seemed unsettled, jaw tightening. "Are we seriously placing weight on a toddler's perception?" he asked, though his voice betrayed hesitation. The evidence, however, left no room for doubt. A child's pointing finger and a dog's trained behavior had revealed what adults had missed, overturning assumptions and redefining the parameters of perception. Rex's tail flicked, a controlled, deliberate signal. He remained fixated on the man, never blinking, never wavering. The German shepherd's presence alone was a quiet reminder of authority, instinct, and discipline, reinforcing the gravity of Emily's observation. The judge finally spoke, his gavel raised but paused midair. "Detectives, proceed with caution," he instructed, voice steady but loaded with tension. "This is extraordinary." There was a pause. Every adult present understood the weight of the moment. They were witnessing something unprecedented, something that defied convention, procedure, and expectation. Detective Harris extended a hand to help the man rise. His eyes were fixed on the floor as he was guided to stand upright. Every detail was being documented, every subtle expression noted. The man's pale, trembling face betrayed months of careful planning undone in a single moment. He realized, too late, that underestimating a toddler's clarity and a dog's instinct had been a fatal mistake. Emily's laughter broke the tension, light and pure. "Doggy helped me," she said again. The tiny girl had solved a problem that had stumped experts for months. She had pointed, guided, and acted with a clarity adults could scarcely comprehend. Rex barked once more in acknowledgement, his sharp eyes still fixed on the man, a silent statement that the threat had been neutralized. The courtroom's energy shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Cameras focused on Emily and Rex, capturing the impossible partnership. The FBI analyst in the back, previously unnoticed, scribbled in her notebook, eyes wide with intrigue. "Fascinating," she muttered. "Extraordinary. If we could understand the mechanics of this interaction, it could change investigative procedures entirely." Rachel clutched Emily's small hand, whispering softly. Her daughter's eyes shone, unafraid and confident. Emily had just altered the course of a criminal case, all before she had even reached her 4th birthday. And as the man was handcuffed and led away, the courtroom realized something profound. What had occurred here was not just a momentary revelation, it was the birth of a legend. A 3-year-old child, armed with innocence, and a German shepherd, armed with instinct, had uncovered the truth where adults had failed. Everyone waited, breathless, for the next revelation. What other secrets might this child and dog duo reveal? And somewhere in the courtroom, eyes watching from behind notepads, someone was already plotting to explore the full potential of this extraordinary partnership. Emily, her small finger still pointing, leaned toward Rex, as if asking what next. And in that moment the courtroom understood. This case, solved by the unlikeliest of detectives, was only the beginning. The courtroom was electric, every inch of space charged with anticipation. A low hum of whispers threaded through the benches as officers and lawyers leaned forward, unable to look away from Emily and Rex. The man, once hidden under the bench, now stood pale and trembling in handcuffs, his eyes darting nervously between the toddler and the German shepherd. He had planned meticulously, thought he had outsmarted every investigator, but he hadn't counted on the sharp instincts of a dog and the fearless clarity of a 3-year-old. Emily clutched her mother's arm tightly. Her wide eyes were fixed on Rex, who sat rigidly at her side, ears pricked and tail motionless. The dog's gaze was locked on the suspect, unwavering, commanding, and somehow silently communicating to everyone in the room that the threat had been neutralized. Emily's voice, small yet authoritative, broke the tense silence again. "Doggy says he's bad." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The jury members leaned forward, brows furrowed. They had come prepared for testimony from forensic experts, police reports, and photographs, but nothing had prepared them for this. A child, barely able to tie her own shoes, had identified the culprit and located the hidden evidence. Even the most seasoned detectives were momentarily speechless. The prosecutor, trying to regain control, leaned over to the judge and whispered, "Your Honor, this is unprecedented. We may need to consider her statements as part of the evidence." The judge's brow furrowed, gavel hovering above the desk. He had presided over hundreds of cases, seen countless witnesses, but never had a 3-year-old played such a pivotal role. He cleared his throat, trying to maintain authority. "We will proceed carefully," he said. "The child's observations are extraordinary and will be treated as relevant under the circumstances." Rachel, Emily's mother, instinctively moved to shield her daughter, but Emily wasn't afraid. She had been focused, confident, and remarkably perceptive. The confidence in her tiny voice left the adults in the room both stunned and uneasy. How could someone so small perceive what the largest, most experienced adults had missed? Detective Harris stepped forward again, flashlight in hand, and began cataloging the evidence Emily had helped uncover. The papers, stolen checks, and personal items were now being carefully placed into evidence bags. Every movement was deliberate, each detail documented meticulously. But the focus of everyone in the room kept drifting back to the small girl and the dog at the front, their unspoken connection apparent to all. The defense attorney, visibly shaken, rose to object. "Your Honor, are we seriously relying on the testimony of a toddler? How can we ensure reliability?" His words, though professional, betrayed disbelief. The judge's gaze swept the courtroom, landing on Emily. While unconventional, her observations have led directly to the recovery of evidence. "It cannot be dismissed lightly," he stated. A silence fell over the room, heavy with tension. Every adult realized that something extraordinary had occurred, and conventional rules seemed insufficient to contain it. Emily, undeterred by the scrutiny, leaned forward and whispered to Rex, "Good job, doggy." The dog responded with a soft whine and a wag of his tail, acknowledging her praise without breaking his disciplined stance. In that brief exchange, the courtroom witnessed a silent partnership, a child's innocence paired with a dog's trained instinct. The energy in the room shifted, awe and disbelief coexisted, binding everyone in shared wonder. Journalists snapped photos furiously, capturing the child pointing, the dog alert, and the man's frightened expression. The courtroom had become a stage, every movement amplified and magnified by the eyes and lenses documenting this unprecedented event. The air was thick with anticipation. No one dared to blink, fearing they might miss the next revelation. Then, almost imperceptibly, the FBI analyst in the back of the room began taking detailed notes, her pen flying across the page. She observed Emily and Rex with a mix of professional curiosity and awe. "Fascinating," she murmured to herself. "If a child can perceive cues that trained adults miss, what does this mean for investigative methodology?" Her presence added a new layer of suspense. Was this partnership simply a fluke, or could it signal a new frontier in law enforcement? The man in handcuffs grew increasingly agitated, shifting from foot to foot. He realized that his carefully orchestrated plan had been completely undone. The papers, once hidden beneath the bench, now clearly implicated him. The stolen property was accounted for, and his fear of exposure had become a tangible, visible thing in the courtroom. Yet he seemed to understand that the most dangerous witnesses had not even spoken a word about the full extent of what they had observed. Emily leaned forward again, pointing at Rex. "Doggy said he's hiding more." Her tone was soft but commanding, filled with the certainty only a child possesses. The room went still. Detectives glanced at each other, hearts racing. Could there really be more evidence, more secrets buried in plain sight? Everyone waited, suspended, the tension so thick it felt like it could be cut with a knife. The judge, sensing the shift in momentum, addressed the room. "We will allow the detectives to investigate further, but all personnel must proceed with caution." His words were calm, measured, yet beneath them ran an undeniable current of anticipation. The courtroom had become a stage for the extraordinary, a partnership between innocence and instinct challenging the very limits of adult perception. Emily's mother whispered softly to her, a mixture of pride and worry. "You're very brave, Emily." Emily simply smiled, eyes still on Rex. She understood in her own way that together they had uncovered truths adults had missed. The moment had shifted from legal procedure to legend, as the tiniest voice in the room now held the power to redirect the course of the case. The jury remained frozen, leaning forward, eyes wide. Their sense of logic had been upended, replaced by a mixture of awe and curiosity. Could they incorporate this unexpected testimony into their deliberations? How could they dismiss what had been so clearly revealed by a 3-year-old's insight and a dog's trained intuition? And as the detectives carefully examined the area beneath the bench, it became clear that Emily had not just seen the hidden man, she had guided them to critical evidence. The jury, the spectators, the reporters, and even the judge realized that this day would be remembered not for the crimes themselves, but for the improbable collaboration between child and K-9 that had uncovered them. The courtroom held its collective breath, every adult acutely aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Emily, small and unassuming, and Rex, powerful and disciplined, had rewritten expectations. The question now was simple, yet charged with suspense. What else might this child and dog duo uncover before the day was done? Detective Harris crouched low, hands trembling slightly as he reached beneath the bench again. The courtroom watched with bated breath. Every journalist's camera was trained on the small girl and the German shepherd at the front, capturing a moment that seemed impossible, surreal. A toddler and a dog leading experienced officers to hidden evidence. Emily, perched on her mother's lap, leaned forward, her tiny fingers still pointing, eyes bright with anticipation. "Doggy said he buried it," she exclaimed again, voice full of certainty. Her words, innocent but commanding, carried a gravity that no adult could ignore. The courtroom seemed to pulse with electricity, every whispered breath amplifying the tension. Rex's ears twitched, tail rigid, his body a coiled spring of focus. The dog's trained instincts had already detected the hidden threat, and now Emily's clarity guided the officers directly to it. Harris reached under the bench, brushing aside scattered papers and a small stack of outdated law books. His hand closed around something soft, then firm. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted it out. A brightly colored toy, a child's doll carefully wrapped around a bundle of papers. The colors seemed incongruous in the serious courtroom, almost absurd, but the gravity of what they contained was undeniable. As he untangled the bundle, murmurs rippled through the room. The toy concealed a collection of incriminating evidence: stolen checks, a wallet with identification cards, and several crumpled papers documenting months of illicit activity. Gasps and whispers filled the benches, jurors leaning forward as if the weight of the revelation might fall into their laps. Reporters clicked away, capturing the impossible moment. A 3-year-old had directed law enforcement to recover evidence that had eluded them for months. The man, still partially crouched where he had been hiding, turned pale. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his hands fidgeted nervously. Every careful plan he had made to remain undetected had unraveled in an instant. The child's innocence and the dog's discipline had pierced the veil he had built around his crimes. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated the most unexpected forces in the room. Emily clapped her small hands together, eyes wide with triumph. "See, Doggy said so," she cheered. Her delight, so pure and unfiltered, made the tension in the room almost unbearable. Rex barked sharply once, the sound controlled, precise, almost as if he were approving the tiny girl's excitement. The partnership between child and dog had accomplished the impossible, and the courtroom had become a stage for a drama far more gripping than any adult had anticipated. The prosecutor leaned over to the judge, voice tight with excitement. "Your Honor, we have recovered the stolen property, and the suspect is clearly implicated. This evidence, it is directly due to the observations of the child and the K-9 unit." He paused, glancing at the jury, who remained frozen in disbelief. "We recommend proceeding immediately." The defense attorney's face was pale, lips pressed tight. "Objection," he said finally, voice wavering. This is unprecedented. Are we seriously considering the testimony of a toddler as guiding evidence?" His protest was professional, but even he could not conceal the disbelief creeping across his expression. The judge's gavel hovered midair, then came down sharply. "Objection noted, but the evidence is tangible, and the child's observations have led directly to its recovery. It cannot be dismissed," he ruled. The courtroom exhaled collectively, tension easing slightly, though excitement and disbelief still crackled in the air. Detective Harris carefully bagged the evidence, labeling each item meticulously. Every officer, reporter, and juror knew that this case would be remembered not for the crimes themselves, but for the extraordinary way they had been uncovered. A child's clarity, paired with a dog's instinct, had done what months of investigation could not. Emily's mother, Rachel, whispered to her, voice full of awe, "You helped catch him, Emily." Emily smiled, as if the idea of heroism was perfectly natural. "Doggy helped too," she added. And in that simple statement lay the truth. The smallest voices and the sharpest instincts could accomplish things that even the most trained adults might miss. In the back of the courtroom, the FBI analyst scribbled furiously in her notebook. Her eyes never left the child and the dog. "Incredible," she murmured under her breath. "If we can study how she perceived cues and how the dog reinforced her insights, this could revolutionize behavioral analysis and investigative procedures." Her words, though quiet, added a new layer of suspense. This case was no longer just a local event. It could have implications far beyond the courthouse walls. The man in handcuffs, now fully exposed, attempted to speak, but his words faltered. The combination of public exposure, physical capture, and the inexplicable role of a 3-year-old child left him shaken. He realized too late that the rules of engagement had changed. In his mind, he had anticipated officers, cameras, and testimony, but he had not anticipated instinct and innocence acting as a single force against him. Emily leaned toward Rex, eyes wide. "We did it," she whispered softly. The dog responded with a low, approving whine, tail flicking once. The courtroom watched the interaction in near silence. In that brief moment, they witnessed not just a child and a dog, but a partnership, a rare alliance that had changed the course of a criminal case. The jury remained riveted, leaning forward, every juror acutely aware that they were witnessing something historic. Their preconceived notions about evidence, observation, and human capability had been upended in an instant. The room buzzed, the energy almost tangible, as everyone realized the extraordinary implications of what had just occurred. As the detectives continued to process the recovered items, a hush fell over the room. Cameras paused, pens hovered mid-scribble, and even the judge leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Something was stirring beyond the immediate evidence. Something about the combination of Emily's perceptiveness and Rex's training suggested that the story was not yet over. The whispers began. What other secrets had this child-and-dog duo uncovered already, unnoticed? Could there be more evidence, more revelations waiting to be discovered? And somewhere in the courthouse, the FBI analyst's pen never stopped moving, capturing every glance, every gesture, every interaction that might hint at the potential of this extraordinary partnership. The courtroom realized one undeniable truth. Emily, small and unassuming, had altered the course of the investigation, aided by Rex's unwavering instincts. And as the man was led away, his head hanging low, everyone understood that this was not just a solved case. It was the beginning of a legend, a story that would be told and retold, whispered in awe by those who had witnessed it firsthand. Emily leaned back in her mother's lap, her finger still brushing against Rex's fur. "Doggy and me, heroes," she whispered. And in that quiet declaration lay the undeniable fact. The smallest voice combined with the sharpest instincts could change everything. The courtroom had quieted, though the tension was far from dissipated. Reporters clicked cameras furiously, capturing every moment of Emily and Rex's extraordinary partnership. The man in handcuffs had been escorted to a holding area, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. He had underestimated everything: the authorities, the child, the dog, and the improbable connection that had undone his careful concealment. In the back of the room, almost unnoticed at first, a woman in plain clothes scribbled furiously into a leather-bound notebook. Her sharp eyes never left Emily and Rex. She was an FBI behavioral analyst, called in to observe from the sidelines, intrigued by the unusual collaboration she had only heard about in briefings. But now, watching it unfold firsthand, her curiosity and professional obsession was riveted. She leaned forward slightly, murmuring to herself, "Fascinating, extraordinary. If we can analyze the mechanics of how the child perceived cues and how the dog reinforced her instincts, this could redefine behavioral observation in investigative work." Her words were quiet, but they carried weight. She was already considering how Emily's natural intuition, combined with Rex's disciplined detection, could be applied to future cases. Detective Harris approached the woman cautiously. "Ma'am, "Are you suggesting the child's input has broader implications?" he asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. She didn't look up from her notes. "I'm suggesting we observe, carefully, without interfering. What's happening here, between this child and this dog, is unprecedented in law enforcement. If we document it, study it, understand it, we could change the way investigations are conducted." Harris frowned. "We've got a criminal in custody, evidence is processed, isn't that enough?" The analyst shook her head. "No, it's never enough. What just happened isn't just solving this case. It's showing us a model of perception, intuition, and instinct that conventional methods miss entirely." Meanwhile, Emily leaned closer to Rex, brushing her fingers over his fur. "We did it, doggy," she whispered softly, eyes sparkling. Rex responded with a low whine, tail flicking once as though acknowledging the praise. Their quiet interaction drew the eyes of the courtroom again, not with spectacle but with something far subtler: trust, understanding, and an unspoken alliance between innocence and training. The FBI analyst scribbled faster, nodding every glance, every movement, every small gesture that indicated the connection. "This is more than coincidence," she murmured. "She reads him, he reads her. Together they see what adults overlook. It's instinct amplified." The jury leaned forward, spellbound, caught between disbelief and fascination. For them, the courtroom had transformed from a simple venue for law to a theater of the extraordinary. They were witnessing an investigative breakthrough live, a demonstration of the power of collaboration between two unlikely allies, a toddler and a K-9. Detective Harris stepped back, shaking his head slightly. He had spent years in law enforcement, seen countless cases, and yet never had he observed anything like this. "I've seen dogs track, I've seen children notice details," he muttered, "but never together, not like this." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, with the evidence recovered, and considering the child's observations which led directly to it, we are prepared to move forward with prosecution." His words were measured but carried an undercurrent of excitement, a recognition that the courtroom had witnessed something historic. Emily clapped her hands softly, smiling at Rex. "Good doggy. He's bad now," she said. Her statement, simple and clear, carried a weight beyond her years. The room seemed to pause in response to her clarity, a brief moment where innocence and justice converged. The judge, observing the unusual interaction, leaned forward and addressed the room. "While unconventional, we acknowledge that the observations made by the child, supported by the K-9 unit, have directly contributed to the discovery of evidence. Let us proceed with caution and respect." His words were measured, but a flicker of astonishment crossed his face. He had presided over hundreds of cases, yet none had ever combined human innocence and canine instinct in such a tangible way. The FBI analyst rose from her chair, notebook in hand, and approached Detective Harris quietly. "I want permission to work closely with you on this, not just for this case but to study the dynamics, how she interprets cues, how he responds, and how they communicate. There's potential here that goes far beyond a single courtroom." Harris glanced back at Emily, who was now hugging Rex gently, unaware of the weight her actions carried. "She's just a kid," he said cautiously. "She's more than a kid," the analyst replied firmly. "She's a model, and he's her partner. Together, they're teaching us something law enforcement has ignored for decades." Meanwhile, the man in custody was being escorted past the courtroom. His eyes flitted nervously to Emily and Rex. Fear, shame, and disbelief warred across his face. He had thought himself untouchable, meticulous, and invisible, but the duo had exposed him with a clarity and precision that adults had not managed. The jury watched silently, captivated by the dynamic unfolding before them. Each movement, each glance between child and dog, each subtle whine or flick of a tail carried meaning they were only beginning to understand. They had come to judge the suspect, but instead they were witnesses to a phenomenon far beyond the scope of the trial. Rachel, still holding Emily, whispered softly, "You were amazing." Emily simply smiled, pointing at Rex. "Doggy helped," she said, and in her simplicity lay the truth. Teamwork, intuition, and trust had accomplished what adults alone could not. Outside the courtroom, the city had already begun buzzing. Reporters would later write about the unlikely detective duo. Social media would light up with the hashtag toddler detective. But inside the courthouse, a subtler story was unfolding, a story of observation, instinct, and a partnership that hinted at a future where the line between human insight and animal intuition blurred in extraordinary ways. And as the courtroom slowly returned to procedure, the FBI analyst remained in the back, notebook full, eyes still on Emily and Rex. She knew this day was only the beginning. There were more lessons to be learned, more secrets to uncover, and more ways in which a child's clarity and a dog's instinct could reshape the very practice of justice. Emily leaned down to Rex, brushing her cheek against his fur. "We're heroes," she whispered softly. Rex nuzzled her back gently, tail flicking once. In that quiet, intimate gesture, the courtroom realized that this story, small, simple, and extraordinary, was far from over. The whispers began anew, quiet but persistent. How had a 3-year-old and a dog revealed what adults could not? And what other mysteries might they uncover next? News of the courtroom spectacle had spread like wildfire before the gavel could even come down. By mid-afternoon, reporters flooded social media feeds with images of Emily pointing at Rex, of the German shepherd frozen in alert precision, and of the man in handcuffs, face pale and trembling. Tweets, posts, and videos circulated across platforms with captions that ranged from incredulous to outright celebratory. Toddler detective, doggy partner, unlikely heroes. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere had shifted. What had been a tense legal proceeding now hummed with anticipation. The jurors sat forward, spellbound, watching the tiny girl interact with the dog who had become her partner in an unprecedented investigation. Even seasoned law enforcement officers whispered in disbelief. They had always known K-9 units were valuable, but pairing instinct with human perception, even from a child, was something entirely new. Emily's mother, Rachel, adjusted her scarf, holding Emily close as the little girl's wide eyes scanned the room. Emily was quiet now, as if sensing the weight of the attention but understanding, in her own way, that this was not her time to speak. Her gaze remained locked on Rex, who sat by her side like a coiled spring, alert to the smallest shift in the courtroom's tension. The FBI analyst scribbled furiously in her notebook, noting every glance, every movement, every flick of the dog's ears, every tiny hand gesture from Emily. She had already begun formulating ideas for a report that would not just document the case, but analyze the mechanisms of perception and instinct that had led to its resolution. Her voice, low and almost reverent, murmured to Detective Harris, "This could change everything we know about behavioral analysis in law enforcement." Detective Harris glanced down at Emily, then at Rex. "She's just a kid," he muttered, though his voice carried awe. "She's more than that," the analyst replied. "And he's more than a dog. Together they see what trained adults can't. It's extraordinary." The man in custody, now escorted through the hallways of the courthouse, realized with sinking dread that his careful planning had utterly failed. He had relied on stealth, anonymity, and adult oversight, but none of that mattered against a child's observation and a dog's instincts. Fear etched itself across his face as he thought about what he had underestimated, the smallest voice and the sharpest senses in the room. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the judge prepared to proceed with testimony, though even he seemed aware that the events of the morning had redefined expectations. "We will continue, but I caution all present," he said, gavel raised, "to recognize that today we have witnessed something extraordinary." His words hung in the air, measured but carrying a note of awe. Emily, perched on her mother's lap, whispered to Rex, "What's next?" Her voice was small but steady, and in that simple question lay a sense of anticipation that rippled through the room. Rex responded with a soft whine, tail flicking once, a silent acknowledgement that their work was not yet finished. Outside, the city had begun to notice. Social media feeds buzzed with speculation, and news outlets scrambled to verify details. Anchors spoke with a mixture of incredulity and excitement. A toddler and a K-9 unit had uncovered stolen property and helped expose a criminal who had eluded police for months. Interviews were scheduled, videos analyzed frame by frame, and hashtags trended within hours. The public was captivated, not just by the crime, but by the improbably brave and perceptive duo that had solved it. Back in the courtroom, the defense attorney's objections had grown quiet, replaced by disbelief and unease. The evidence recovered was irrefutable, and the unusual circumstances made it impossible to dismiss. Even as he struggled to regain composure, he recognized that the public attention would shape the narrative more than legal argument. The courtroom was no longer just a venue for judgment. It was a theater, and the smallest participants had become its stars. Emily clapped her hands softly, giggling as Rex nudged her gently with his snout. The subtle interplay between them, child and dog, intuition and instinct, had captivated every observer. Even the jury, accustomed to the logic of legal procedure, found themselves leaning forward, eyes wide, caught in the unspoken communication between the two. The FBI analyst rose and quietly addressed Detective Harris. "We need to understand how this works," she said, voice low but insistent. Her perception, his instincts, there's a pattern here that could inform future investigations. I want to study it, document it, train others in it. This is groundbreaking. Harris swallowed hard, eyes flicking to Emily, who was now resting her head lightly against Rex's fur. "Are we talking about using a 3-year-old as an investigator?" he asked, half joking, half serious. "Not just her," the analyst replied. "It's the interaction, the observation, the instinct. It's the combination that matters. Together, they've accomplished what adults alone could not." The man in custody was now seated in the holding area, staring at the walls, pale and defeated. He had been exposed, his crimes documented, his anonymity obliterated. Yet even he understood that the most astonishing revelation had nothing to do with him. It was the extraordinary capabilities of the duo that had uncovered his secrets. As the courtroom prepared to reconvene, Emily leaned slightly toward Rex, whispering, "Ready." The dog responded with a small whine, eyes fixed on her. Together, they had transformed a routine trial into something unforgettable, something legendary. Their quiet communication, their partnership, had shifted the balance of power in the room, leaving everyone aware that they were witnessing something historic. And as the cameras continued to flash, as reporters whispered excitedly to one another, as jurors and officers alike leaned forward in anticipation, one undeniable truth became clear. Emily and Rex were no longer just participants in a trial. They were catalysts. The smallest voice in the courtroom had spoken, and the sharpest instincts had confirmed it. The city, the media, and even law enforcement would never see a case, or a child and a dog, quite the same way again. The question lingering in every mind, unspoken but pervasive, was clear. If Emily and Rex could uncover the truth here, what other secrets could they reveal? What mysteries, hidden in plain sight, awaited their attention? And somewhere in the courthouse, the FBI analyst scribbled furiously, her pen racing against the possibilities. The story of a child and a dog had just begun. The courtroom held its breath as the final day of the trial began. Cameras were set, reporters whispered among themselves, and every eye in the room was fixed on Emily and Rex. The little girl, perched on her mother's lap, finger barely able to stretch toward Rex, seemed calm yet aware that today would determine the ultimate outcome of the man who had terrorized the community for months. Rex sat perfectly still, eyes sharp, ears pricked. His presence alone was a testament to discipline, training, and loyalty. But in tandem with Emily, he had become more than a K-9 unit. He had become a partner, a guide, an extension of her perception. The room seemed to sense it. Every adult, every officer, every juror leaned in, almost instinctively, attuned to the duo's silent communication. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, trying to regain formal composure. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, voice measured yet heavy with anticipation, "you have heard the testimony, observed the evidence, and witnessed extraordinary events. It is now your duty to render a verdict." The jury rose, filing carefully into the deliberation room, eyes still wide from the unbelievable scenes they had witnessed. Behind them, Emily's gaze followed Rex, tiny fingers brushing his fur in a gesture of reassurance. The German shepherd's head tilted, ears flicking, as though understanding her silent encouragement. It was a partnership that defied logic, yet everyone in the courtroom recognized it as undeniably effective. Outside, the city had erupted. Social media feeds buzzed, news outlets broadcasted live updates, and hashtags trended worldwide. The story of a 3-year-old girl in a K-9 unit had captured the public imagination. Families across the nation watched from living rooms, imagining their own children in Emily's tiny shoes, dreaming of having the courage to speak truth to power. The legend was already taking shape, even before the verdict was announced. Inside, the defense attorney rose, attempting one last appeal. "Your Honor, we contend that the reliance on a child's observations, while perhaps useful, cannot substitute for rigorous investigative procedure." His voice trembled slightly. It wasn't disbelief in the law, it was disbelief in what had transpired. He could not undo the truth the child and dog had uncovered. The prosecutor, calm but firm, countered, "Your Honor, the evidence recovered under the child's guidance and the K-9's instincts is irrefutable. It led to the capture of the suspect and recovery of stolen property. The court has witnessed the extraordinary validity of their contribution firsthand." Emily, sensing the seriousness of the moment, whispered softly to Rex, "We found him, now he's done." The dog gave a subtle, approving whine, tail flicking once, acknowledging her statement. The courtroom seemed to lean in, listening not just to the words but to the profound bond and understanding between the pair. The judge's gavel fell, echoing through the room. "The jury will now deliver the verdict," he announced. A hush fell over the courtroom as the jury filed back in. Their faces were a mix of awe, contemplation, and gravity. Every juror carried in their mind the image of a tiny girl pointing, a German shepherd alert, and a man's elaborate plan unraveling in front of them. Foreperson Allen, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, rose to speak. "Your Honor, the jury has reached a unanimous verdict." The room seemed to tilt slightly, as if the walls themselves held their collective breath. Emily leaned forward, clutching Rex's fur with anticipation. Every eye in the courtroom was riveted, waiting for a declaration that would close this chapter but open an unforgettable legend. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts," Allen announced. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Gasps and murmurs mixed with applause as people realized that justice had been served, not just through legal procedure, but through the extraordinary alliance of human intuition and animal instinct. Emily giggled softly, bouncing slightly on her mother's lap. "Doggy was right," she whispered. Rex barked once, sharp and approving, his tail flicking proudly. The duo had not just solved a case, they had changed the very perception of what was possible in law enforcement. Detective Harris, who had spent years in the field, shook his head in disbelief. "I've seen a lot," he muttered, "but nothing like this." The FBI analyst, still scribbling furiously in her notebook, looked up with wide eyes. "We need to study this. Document it, share it. This is revolutionary." The man in custody was led away, his head bowed, face pale and defeated. He had underestimated everything: experience, training, security, and most of all, the insight of a child and the instincts of a dog. For the first time in months, he was truly powerless. Outside, the story exploded. News helicopters hovered over the courthouse, capturing footage of Emily and Rex as they exited into the crisp winter air. Journalists clamored for interviews, but Rachel gently guided her daughter away. Emily, small and brave, waved at the cameras, her tiny hand brushing Rex's fur. She had been courageous, perceptive, and unafraid, and now the world knew it. Across the city, children in classrooms, parents in offices, and law enforcement officers at precincts marveled at the story. A 3-year-old and a dog had brought a criminal to justice, recovered stolen property, and rewritten expectations. Social media exploded with admiration, awe, and disbelief, cementing their legend in public consciousness. Later that evening, back at home, Emily sat on the couch, Rex lying at her feet, both exhausted but content. Rachel watched quietly, heart full of pride. "You were amazing today," she whispered. Emily, her small hand resting on Rex's head, simply smiled. "We did it, Mommy. Doggy helped." And in that simple truth lay everything: courage, perception, instinct, and partnership. Emily and Rex had not just solved a case. They had created a story that would ripple far beyond the walls of the courthouse. A story of bravery, intuition, and extraordinary collaboration that would be told for years to come. As the city settled into night, one thought lingered in every mind that had followed the case. What other secrets might this remarkable child and her extraordinary dog uncover next? The answer remained unknown, but one certainty was clear. Emily and Rex had changed the game forever, and the legend of the smallest detective duo in American history had just begun.